Hi, I'm Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. I've got a great little project for you today. Take a look at this cute little tote. Quick and easy, handles, lining, everything. The best part is that out of one charm pack, you can make 3 of these. Take a look at this. Isn't that the coolest thing ever? 3 from one charm pack. You heard me right. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to show you how to make this little tote, and it is just easy. You're just going to enjoy this so much. So let's go ahead and get right to it. So what you're going to need for this project is you're going to need 12 charm squares, just the squares, 12 of them. I use this tapestry by Fig Tree and Company from Moda. I love Joanna Figueroa's stuff, and really pretty, fun different colors. And then you're going to need, for your handles and your lining and the bottom, you're going to need a little over ½ a yard. So I'd get 3/4 just to be safe. So you've got your 12 charms and about 3/4 of a yard of fabric, and you'll be able to make one of these bags. Now remember that in a charm pack, there's 42 charms. And so if you're only using 12, that's only 36 charms for all 3 of these. So you'll get 3 bags out of one charm pack, and then you're just going to add your lining and handles on. So right here, what I've done is I've sewn 6 of these together, and that's all you have to do. You just have to find 6 squares to match and put together. You're going to sew them together in two rows of 3, and you'll need 2 of those, one for the front and one for the back. And then the bottom of the bag is just a 7-inch piece of fabric that you're going to cut out of your contrasting fabric. Remember, you have your charms, and then you have your 3/4 of a yard of some kind of contrasting fabric, and you're going to cut that 7 by the width of your charms. Now the cool thing about this purse is I came up with this idea when one of my grandchildren needed a bag to carry their music in. And so I thought, well, I have these leftover charms, we could make a cute little bag. And so what I want you to remember is that if you need a bag that's bigger than that or taller than that, you just add more charms. You can add another row, you can add 5 more rows, you can make it taller, wider, and then what you're going to do is your bottom is always going to be 7 inches wide by the width of your bag. So this one, we just measure our little charm things here, and they come out about roughly 14 inches. So this is going to be roughly 7 by 14. The roughly part depends on your seam allowances and that sort of thing. So then what you're going to do is you're going to sew these 2 together and make one long piece. So I'm going to go over here to the sewing machine and do that. And we'll be lickety-split about it. Get back here. And then I'll just sew this other half onto the bottom right here. Line it up. We got to keep it nice and straight. Sew your 1/4 inch. This is all done 1/4 inch, just like you would do a quilt. So here we've got this great piece. The 2 sides are sewn together to the 7-inch piece in the middle, and we need to press those. So I'm going to set this seam, and I'm going to press, and I'm going to do that on both sides. You want a nice flat piece for this. One of my seams is laying over all wonky. And then just press it back. And you want this pressed nice and flat, because the next thing we're going to do is we're going to quilt it. Now, I don't do a lot of free motion quilting, but what I do is easy. Anybody can do it. So you're going to find a piece of leftover batting. We all have scraps left over from some project or another, and it's going to be roughly the same size. We're going to lay our top on our batting, and then we're just going to sew along here to anchor it, if you will. And then I'm just going to eyeball and just really guesstimate about a ½ inch from one line to the other, and I'm just going to sew the whole length of this over and over. Now I have a piece here that I've already started, And this is a whole different color of purse. And I've got it almost sewed up to this edge. So I want to show you just how I do that and how really, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's going to come and measure your lines. You know, you just want it to have that kind of quilted textured look. So we'll head over here. And I am just going to come right here and really seriously, you know, relax. I'm just going to eyeball this from one end to the other. And just go ahead and sew down here. I'll get down here to the end and I'll flip my fabric around. And because the purse is small enough, it can fit in the throat of your sewing machine. It'll be fine. All right, well, it looks like I need one more time, so let me go ahead and do that. And you'll notice it isn't even totally straight, but it doesn't matter because it's going to be part of a purse that you know, it's going to be folded up with handles on it. I mean, and nobody's going to pick at it and look at it. Okay, so what we want to do here is I'm going to move this, and now we want to trim our top. So we're just going to take our ruler, and I'm going to go along here and trim this, and I'm going to trim right through the batting and the quilt and make a nice clean edge, because this top now is going to become the pattern for my lining. What I love about this too is that I often have little, you know, just, I don't know, a dozen or so charms left. And you know, I hate the waste thing. So this gives us something to do with these little charms that's quick and easy. Okay, so now I have this piece here. This now becomes the pattern for my liner. So I have a piece of fabric here, a contrasting piece of fabric that's roughly the same size. I already kind of pre-trimmed it off of my my big fabric that I chose to begin with. So I'm just going to lay this down on here, and you have to be careful because you don't want to cut your top, but I am really going to use this as a pattern. It's going to be cut exactly the same size as the top. So I'm going to go along this side and line up my ruler so that all I'm cutting now is that bottom the bottom lining piece, because they have to match. All right, now we're going to start forming our purse. And to do that, we're going to move we do exactly the same thing to the lining as we do to the bag to form the purse. So first we'll take the purse outside, and we're going to fold it directly in half like this. Line up your top edge and fold in half, and we're just going to sew a seam down the sides like this. So let's go do that. And your seam width on this, it doesn't really matter. I come in a little bit more than a quarter, but you know, if you have a good tight seam, you're good. And you did probably notice that I did back stitch a little bit on there. So now I'm going to do the same thing with my lining. I backstitched a little bit on the edge of that because I just don't want it to come apart when I'm putting these together. You want to make sure your seam allowances are the same. So if you decide to take a little bit bigger than a 1/4 inch seam, you want to take a little bit bigger on both pieces. So now you have these two pieces, and what we're going to do now is we're going to box the corners. This is going to give your bag a flat bottom so that it can sit, and what I do is I just kind of put my hand inside the bag and I kind of just push it around it like this so that it makes it flat. I want to keep that seam fairly straight. And the rule of thumb on this is that how far you go in on your bag is how wide it's going to be. So if I come in, you know, 1.5 inches, that means I'm going to have 1.5 inches on either side of the seam line. So that's going to give me like a 3-inch bottom. I hope that makes sense to you. I'm going to take a pen, And I'm going to line up my ruler on my little seam line I have here, and I'm just going to kind of roughly draw a line across here. And then I'm going to stick a pin in here to hold that because I want, that's where I'm going to sew straight across there. So we'll do the same thing to the other side, so you get to see this twice. So here we go. I put my hand in there, lay it flat, make sure it's lined up in the middle. And then I set my ruler on here, and I'm coming in 1.5 inches. Draw my line. Stick a pin in there. And then I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew straight across there. Take out my pin. Don't want any crazy accidents. Nothing crazy going on. All right, let me get these threads off of here. Do the same thing on this side. All right. Now I would suggest that you flip your bag right side out and take a look at it and make sure that that bottom is how you want it. So see how it does that? And it just gives it a nice little sitting place. It makes the bottom nice and flat. So then you can go back and you can trim those off. If it's how you want it, you can go back and trim that off. So I've gone ahead and boxed the corners on my lining as well. Did the same thing. We've checked it. We've turned it inside out. It looks good. And now we're just going to cut those off. And you can do that with a rotary cutter or a scissor. Just takes a little brave moment to come across here and just trim that off. You just don't want that extra bulk inside your bag. So we have this one trimmed off. So now we have our 2 pieces, and we're almost ready to assemble our purse. But you want to make sure, when I told you to sew up the side seams, we just sewed them up, but you want to make sure you leave a little opening. So if you leave an opening, you won't have to pick yours out like me, because that's where we're going to turn our purses, through the side seam. So we're just going to leave a little opening. So I just picked out those 2 little stitches right there. And that will give me an opening to be able to turn my purse when I get it in there. So we just need that little opening right there. But the next thing we're going to do is handles. Now your handles can be any width and any length that you want. What I generally do when I'm making a purse is I put it on my shoulder. I see how long I'm going to hold it, you know, where I'm going to want it to hit on me. So I start off just by cutting a 4-inch piece of fabric that's the width of the fabric. So this is going to give me plenty of handle, you know, if I want it long. When you've made more than one, then you get used to what size you need. But just to start off with, it's always a good idea to have a little more, because you can always cut off some, but you can't add to it. So I take a 4-inch strip of fabric like this that's cut the width of the fabric, and I'm going to iron that in half. And then I'm going to iron my 2 sides to the middle. So I like a handle that's about 1 inch wide. This will differ. Everybody has, you know, a different feel for how they want things, but this seems to work well for me. So I'm going to iron this to the middle like this. And then once you have your middle line ironed, it gives you a guide to iron the sides in. So now I'm just going to kind of fold my sides almost to the line, but not quite. And because what I want to do is I want to make a strap that's about 1 inch wide. So what I've done is I ironed my strip in half to give me a middle point. And then I just folded in just a little bit of ways so that you can still see the middle line right there, but I want my handle to be about 1 inch wide. So that gives me about 1 inch wide handle right there. And you may want a little smaller or larger, but this is how I like to do it. And then I'm going to open these up, and I'm going to lay a strip of batting in here. I have some 1-inch strips cut. And I'm just going to unfold one side, it doesn't matter which side, and lay a strip of batting in there. And I even have, you know, I love to use scraps, so I have a couple of pieces, and it doesn't really matter. You know, it doesn't have to be one long piece is what I'm trying to say. There we go. We'll just lay that one in there. So then what we're going to do is we're going to overlap our piece of our handle onto itself like this. I'm going to whack off this little strip. Then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to sew several rows down along the handle. You can see I've done that on this handle. Well, you might be able to see easier on this side. I used a lighter thread, and you can see that it's, you know, it's just, they're maybe about 1/4 of an inch apart, and you just kind of seam it down. So I start on the outside edge. Let me take this over here to my sewing machine. And I start here on this outside edge because I want to close in, you know, make sure my batting doesn't come sneaking out. And I'm just going to sew along here. And once it's all folded up in there, I mean, you can just whiz along these. It's just a quick little process. And then I just bring it around, and the next one I'm going to sew is the exact same distance on the other side. So we're going from we're sewing down one side, then we're going to sew down the other side, then we'll put a filler seam in the middle. So I've sewed one seam on either side, and now I'm putting the last one right down the middle. And that's going to give us a handle that has some, you know, I mean, it's good to hold on to. So now that our handles are done, we are ready to assemble our bag. So I've got my handles. I cut both of the ends off so that they're matching. And I'm just going to kind of hang them over my shoulder and see how long I want this bag to be. And then I'll just trim them at the same time so they're the same length. And these are about 40 inches, you know, a little bit, no wait, yeah, about 38 inches, you know, just about that long. And how I put these in is I take the body of my bag and it's inside out. So the outside is showing, and I make sure my handles are going the same direction, and I set them down inside the bag. So then I'm going to measure 1 inch out from the seam and put a pin in that handle. And I'm going to put 1 inch out on this side and put a pin in that handle as well. And we're going to do that to the front and back of the bag, so we have 2 handles. So again, we want to hold it to make sure it's got no twists in it. We're going to bring it up like this, and we're going to drop it down in that bag. And we're going to put an inch in from the side seam. You can use the side seam, or you can match it straight across from the other handle that you have. And that's what I did. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this one. I'll hold my bag across, and so my handles line up. You can see right here, I just match them from one side to the other, and then pin that. Then what we're going to do is we're going to drop our lining in. Now our bag is inside out, but our lining is right side out. And remember, you have this little hole here on the side because that's where we're going to turn it. So we're going to drop this liner right down inside here. And we're going to line up the side seams. So I'm going to put a pin right in here where the side seams are. See, I'll just match them right there and put a pin. And then I'm going to put my lining over where the handle is, and I'm going to move my pin so that now I'm pinning all 3 of those layers together. So my pin will now go through the handle and the lining and the outside. And I'll do that same thing on this side over here. And this is a good place to check and make sure that your lining is the same size, because if your lining is a little bigger, it's really easy to fix. You just take in that seam a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and pin these and pin where my handles are. Make sure your handles are straight down. And then I'll pull this tight across here, and I'm going to put a pin in the middle. And one over here, and you have to remember to be sure and take these pins out before you sew over them. And you're going through several layers. And then our middle piece is right here. And you just guess the middle and stick a pin in there. What you want is you just want to be able to sew around the top and not have to worry about it. So now we head to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew this top part of our bag. And I kind of like to do this a little bit wider than 1/4 inch, and start on a side seam. So I'm sewing this a little bit wider than a 1/4 inch. And I'm just taking my pins out as I come along. Don't lose your pin. You don't want to find that later. Almost lost that one. Make sure your handles are straight. All right. So now your bag is all sewed all the way around the top, and we're going to reach in here and find our opening that we opened on our left open on the side of our bag. And you can leave an opening on you can put it on the bottom or anywhere that you want. It's convenient on the side, and you're just going to stuff the whole bag through that hole. So we're just pushing it through there. You can give your handles a little pull. It'll help you free things up. And I reach in here with my arm and I push out these corners so they are nice and straight, and I do it on both bags. Then we're going to go ahead and push the lining right down inside, because you'll notice now, even though it came across really crazy, that it's all lined up right. Our lining lines up, our handles are right. And the last thing left to do is we're going to go along this top edge, and we're just going to top stitch it all the way around. And that will keep the lining down in there, tucked down, and it will give added strength to your handles. So let's go ahead and do that. And make sure you don't sew over your handles. That would be a terrible thing to have happen. So pull your handle out like this. And you want to make sure that your seam is lined up. So if you're worried at all about those two pieces, fold them down and put a pin there. I'm just going to zip along here and watch as I go along. And let me scoot these over here so we can see better. There we go. I got so many handles here. I'm gonna run over something if I'm not careful. There we go. All right, now we have one more tiny thing to do, and that is we still have this little hole in our side. So what you can do is you can pull this seam together like this, and you can just stitch it on your sewing machine, or you can hand stitch it, whatever you'd like to do. I'm all about the sewing machine, so I'm going to do that really quick, because we don't want things falling down into our lining. And as quick as that, you have a little tote bag. Just easy and quick. If you want several little tips I'm going to give you. If you want to add a pocket on your lining, you'll want to do that before you sew it up. If you want to put a catch on your bag or a snap or something like that, you'll put that in also before you sew this lining top together. But you can do all kinds of things with this. Remember, the straps are adjustable, the bag is adjustable depending upon how many charms you put on it. And you get 3 of these out of 1 charm pack. So we hope you enjoyed this tutorial from the Missouri Star Quilt Company.